It was a cold night in the winter of 1978 in the quiet countryside of Colorado. Snow had been falling since morning, and by nightfall, the entire town was buried under thick white layers. The wind howled around small wooden houses, and most people had locked their doors tightly, staying close to the fire. Roads were empty, cars were frozen in their tracks, and even the animals had gone silent. But in a small wooden house at the edge of Highway 16, a soft light still glowed through the storm. Inside that little house lived a woman named Lillian Jackson, known by everyone as Grandma Lil. She was 62 years old, with silver hair tied neatly in a bun and a heart big enough to hold the whole town. Her home was small but warm, filled with the smell of baked bread and the ticking sound of an old clock on the wall. She lived alone after her husband passed away years ago, but she never complained. She kept herself busy by cooking, sewing, and helping anyone who knocked on her door. People said, "If you're hungry, lost, or lonely, go to Grandma Lil's. She'll find a way to help." That evening, the storm outside grew stronger. Snowflakes hit the windows like small stones, and the sound of the wind was almost like a cry. Lillian wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and looked out the window. She whispered a prayer, asking God to protect travelers who might be stuck out there in the cold. She turned to stir the pot of vegetable soup bubbling on the stove. Just then she thought she heard something faint, a low rumble, almost like thunder. But it couldn't be thunder in a snowstorm. She stood still and listened again. The sound grew louder. It wasn't thunder, it was engines. Her heart skipped a beat. Now who would be out here in weather like this? She muttered to herself. She moved closer to the window, trying to see through the snow. In the distance, faint lights blinked, like the glow of headlights struggling against the storm. Moments later, there was a loud knock on the door. It was firm and strong, shaking the old wood. Lillian's first thought was worry. She lived alone, and it was past midnight. But her kind heart pushed the fear aside. She took a deep breath and opened the door. What she saw made her freeze for a second. Standing there in the blinding snow were 9 large men, covered in leather jackets and snow. Their faces were red from the cold, and their breath came out in heavy clouds. On the backs of their jackets, she could read 2 words that most people would have feared: Hell's Angels. For a moment, the wind howled between them. The men looked rough and tired, their boots buried in snow. The one standing in front, a tall man with a gray beard, spoke first. His voice was deep but respectful. "Ma'am," he said, shivering slightly, "we're real sorry to bother you. Our van slid off the road a mile back. We can't see a thing out there, and there ain't no place open for miles. We just need a bit of shelter till the storm eases up." Lillian looked at them. 9 strangers, cold and stranded, with nowhere to go. Any other person might have closed the door, but she didn't. Instead, she gave a small smile and said, "Well, come on in before you all freeze to death. The Lord didn't give me heat just for myself." The men exchanged looks, surprised. They weren't used to people trusting them, not with their jackets and tattoos and heavy boots. But they followed her inside, stamping snow off their feet. The warmth hit them like a wave. The smell of soup, wood smoke, and baked bread filled the small room. One of the men, younger than the rest, looked around and whispered, "Smells like home." Lillian smiled and began pulling out extra blankets from the closet. "Sit by the fire," she said. "You'll catch pneumonia standing there." The men gathered near the fireplace, rubbing their hands, watching the flames dance. None of them spoke for a while. The storm outside roared like a beast, but inside it was quiet and peaceful. The gray-bearded man finally introduced himself. "Name's Rick Nolan, but everyone calls me Bear," he said. "These are my brothers. We were heading to Denver when the van lost control." "You sure it's okay we're here, ma'am?" Lillian chuckled softly. "If the Lord sent you to my door, it must be for a reason. And stop calling me ma'am, just call me Grandma Lil." That made everyone smile. The ice began to melt, not just on their jackets but in their hearts. Lillian served them hot bowls of soup and thick slices of bread. The men ate quietly at first, but soon laughter began to fill the room. One of them offered to fix her broken chair leg in return. Another started stacking wood by the stove. As the hours passed, the house felt less like a stranger's home and more like a safe haven. Lillian told stories from her younger days, about her husband who was a train conductor, about raising her children, and about how kindness always finds its way back. At one point, she said softly, "You know, people always see what's on the outside, jackets, looks, words, but the good Lord sees what's inside. And I see a bunch of cold, tired men who just need a warm meal and some kindness. Bear looked down at his bowl, his eyes glistening. Ain't many people see us like that, he said quietly. Most just cross the street when they see us coming. Lillian reached over and patted his hand. Then maybe they need new glasses, she said with a wink. The room burst into gentle laughter again. As midnight turned to morning, the storm got even worse. The wind screamed and snow piled higher against the door. Lillian insisted they all stay the night. There's no sense dying out there when there's a warm roof right here, she said firmly. She gave up her own bed to two of the youngest bikers, who had barely stopped shivering. The rest slept near the fire, wrapped in quilts she had sewn years ago. Lillian sat in her old rocking chair, keeping the fire alive, humming old gospel tunes under her breath. In the dim light of the fire, the bikers looked peaceful, like children finally getting rest after a long road. As dawn approached, she bowed her head and whispered a short prayer. Lord, thank you for bringing these sons here tonight. Watch over them when they ride again. Let them remember this warmth when they see someone else in need. When morning came, the storm had slowed. The world outside was covered in thick snow, shining under the pale light. The men woke up to the smell of coffee and pancakes. Lillian was already in the kitchen, smiling as if hosting family. They helped clear her porch and dig a small path through the snow. Before leaving, Bear took off one of his gloves and shook her hand gently. You saved us last night, he said. We won't forget it. You ever need help in anything and we'll be there. Lillian smiled. I don't need anything but prayers, she said. But if you want to thank me, help someone else one day. That's how kindness keeps moving. The bikers nodded. They stepped out into the cold again, their engines roaring to life. As they rode away, their tires cutting through snow, Lillian stood on her porch waving until they disappeared down the white road. For the rest of that day, her small house was quiet again. The fire burned low and the ticking clock filled the silence. But Lillian's heart was full. She didn't know that what she did that night, opening her door to 9 strangers, would become a story told for generations. Those men rode away into the cold morning, but they carried something far warmer than heat, the memory of a woman who showed them that kindness has no color, no fear, and no limit. That night, when the wind blew softly again and snowflakes brushed her window, Lillian smiled to herself and whispered, Thank you, Lord. I think I just made 9 new sons tonight. And she had no idea that those 9 men, those rough bikers from the open road, had made a promise to each other right then, that the woman who saved them from the blizzard would never stand alone again. The sun had finally come out after days of snow. The white fields shone like glass, and the roads were still buried halfway under the thick layer of ice. Inside her little house, Grandma Lil stood near the window, watching the world come back to life. It had been a few days since those 9 bikers had shown up at her door during the blizzard, the night she never expected, but would never forget. She smiled to herself whenever she thought about it. She still remembered the way those men had looked when they first stepped inside, frozen, tired, and half lost, and how their faces softened when she gave them food and warmth. She didn't know much about who they were, but she felt deep inside that they were good souls who had just taken a rough road in life. For a few days, everything went back to normal. She continued her daily routine, making breakfast, feeding the birds, sweeping the snow off her porch, and reading her Bible near the fire. But something strange started to happen. One morning, when she opened her door to get wood, she found a stack of freshly chopped logs near her steps. She looked around confused. She hadn't cut them and no one in the town had come by. On top of the pile was a small note that said, "Keep warm, Grandma." The angels. She laughed softly, shaking her head. Those boys really meant it, she said. The next week, she found groceries on her porch, flour, sugar, canned goods, and even coffee. No one knocked, no one called, but every time she needed something, it seemed to appear. She began to realize that the 9 men who had stayed that stormy night hadn't forgotten her. They were keeping their promise in their own quiet way. Sometimes, on clear evenings, she would hear the distant rumble of motorcycles on the highway. The sound made her heart warm. She would go out on her porch, wave her hand, and sometimes she could spot a few figures in leather jackets riding by slowly, raising their hands in return before disappearing down the road. One afternoon, a loud knock came on her door again, This time she didn't hesitate. When she opened it, Bear, the gray-bearded biker, was standing there holding a brown paper bag. "Well, look who the wind blew in," Lillian said with a smile. Bear laughed. "Had some free time, Grandma. Thought I'd drop off some groceries. And, some pie from a diner down the road? Don't taste as good as yours, but it'll do." She laughed and waved him inside. "You boys don't have to keep doing all this." Bear shook his head. "We don't do it because we have to. We do it because we want to. You helped us when nobody else would. You treated us like people, not trouble. We're just returning that kindness." They sat together drinking coffee as snow began to fall again outside. Bear told her about his group, how most of them didn't have families, how the road was their home, and how that night had reminded them what it felt like to be cared for. "You know, Grandma," he said softly, "a lot of us ain't had anyone call us sons in a long time, but that night, it felt like home." Her eyes grew soft. "Then it looks like I got 9 more boys to worry about," she said kindly. After that day, their visits became a regular thing. Sometimes it was Bear, sometimes one of the younger riders named Tommy who helped fix her fence or cleaned her gutters. Other times a few of them came together just to drink coffee and sit by her fire, listening to her stories. They called her Club Grandma, and soon, every biker who joined their group knew her name. Years went by, and Grandma Lil's little home became more than just a house. It became a small symbol of kindness that stretched far beyond the highway. People in town began to notice the motorcycles that parked near her porch every few weeks. At first, some folks whispered. They wondered why a group of tough-looking bikers kept visiting an old woman. But soon, even the townspeople began to see what was really going on. One evening, a local shop owner told his wife, "Those bikers? They're the most respectful men I've ever seen. They buy groceries for that lady and always help her shovel her driveway." Grandma Lil never cared about what others said. She only cared about hearts, and she knew those men had good ones. One summer day, when the sun was high and the road shimmered with heat, a few of the bikers showed up with a truck full of wood and paint cans. They told her to sit on the porch and rest while they worked. By sunset, her entire house had a new coat of white paint, and her broken fence was replaced. When she asked how she could repay them, Bear smiled and said, "Just keep the coffee hot for next time." It wasn't just help they gave her family. They celebrated her birthday every year, bringing gifts and laughter. When she turned 70, they filled her small yard with balloons, cooked food on a grill, and sang happy birthday, louder than anyone in town ever had. But the most powerful moment came one fall evening when trouble showed up. Some teenagers from another town thought it would be funny to steal the firewood stacked behind her shed. Lillian caught them and tried to reason with them gently, but they ran away laughing. That night, she didn't say a word to anyone, but somehow the angels found out. The next morning, 3 motorcycles were parked outside her home. The riders didn't cause trouble. They just stood watch. They never said what they did or how, but from that day on, no one ever bothered Grandma Lil again. People began to say that the old lady on Highway 16 had angels on wheels watching over her. Winter came again, bringing another snowstorm, though not as harsh as the one years ago. Lillian was older now, slower on her feet, but her heart was still young. She often sat by the fire, knitting scarves for her biker sons. Every time they visited, she handed each one a scarf with his name stitched in it. Bear once told her, "Grandma, we ride through all kinds of storms out there, but none of them feel cold when we wear these." She smiled softly. Then my stitches did their job. The years continued to roll on like the road itself. One by one, her biker sons got older too, but they never forgot her. They came in rain, snow, and heat, sometimes just to bring her a pie, sometimes to fix a broken step, and sometimes just to sit beside her while she told stories about her younger days. One spring morning, Bear visited her again. He noticed she looked weaker than before, her hands trembling a little as she poured tea. He sat beside her quietly, listening as she talked about her husband, about life, and about faith. "You know, Bear," she said gently, "the Lord sends people to us for a reason. I never understood why he sent 9 bikers to my door that night, but now I see. You boys gave me more family than I could have ever asked for." Bear's eyes grew moist. "No, Grandma, you gave us something we'd forgotten how to find. Love without judgment." That was the last time he saw her alive. A few weeks later, The news spread across towns and highways that Grandma Lil had passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 81. The little house on Highway 16 was quiet again, but not for long. On the day of her funeral, the sound of engines echoed through the hills. Dozens of motorcycles rode in slowly, their riders wearing black leather jackets and carrying white flowers. They filled the small churchyard, parking their bikes in neat rows, the engines rumbling softly like a hymn. Inside the church, every seat was taken, townspeople, shop owners, neighbors, and a large group of bikers sitting silently, their heads bowed. At the front stood her simple wooden casket, surrounded by flowers and photographs of her smiling face. When it was time to say goodbye, Bear walked forward carrying a folded leather patch. On it were 2 words stitched in gold, "Forever protected." He placed it gently on her casket and whispered, "You'll always ride with us, Grandma." When the service ended, the bikers started their engines. The sound filled the valley, deep, strong, and steady. They rode slowly through town, leading her funeral procession. People came out of their homes, standing by the road with tears in their eyes as they watched the sight. A long line of bikers escorting a gentle old woman on her final journey. From that day forward, the angels kept their promise. Every year, on the same week she passed, they returned to that little house. Some brought flowers to her grave. Others repaired her old porch and kept the yard clean. They said it made them feel close to her, like she was still watching over them. Her story spread far and wide. About a woman who opened her door to 9 strangers in a snowstorm and changed their lives forever. It wasn't about fear or appearances, but about kindness, faith, and the power of love that sees beyond what the eyes can see. And even years later, travelers passing through Highway 16 would sometimes spot a small bunch of flowers lying near an old mailbox, or hear the soft echo of motorcycle engines slowing down as they passed the empty house. They didn't know the story, but the riders did. Every time they rode by, they looked at that house and smiled, remembering her gentle voice saying, "Ain't no color in kindness." Baby, for the rest of their lives, they carried her lessons in their hearts: help others, judge no one, and always keep a space for kindness. And in the wind that rushed past them on long rides, they could almost hear her voice, soft and loving, whispering, "Be safe, my boys." They would smile and reply to the sky, "Don't worry, Grandma. We never forgot you, and we never will."